One of the challenges that Ukraine faces is they've got at least 1,000 miles of frontline border, even more if you include the border with Belarus. And let's give an idea of the scale required for troops on the ground. If you were to put troops 60 feet apart, which doesn't appear that credible as a deterrence, you'd need 100,000 troops to man the border. Now, you've got to give them a break, so they've got to have 4 months on, 4 months off, and then 4 months training ready for deployment. So you actually need 300,000 troops to be able to man that. Well, the harsh reality is, even if you use the whole of the UK army, about 30,000 deployable, that's about 10%. There's potential for France to provide another 10%, but it's pretty clear Italy wouldn't provide any. Poland is worried about its own national security, and there's no way that America wants to get itself bogged down in Ukraine. And therefore, where would the rest of these troops come from? It's just not a credible option.
If you go back to the aftermath of the Vietnam War, and I entered the Army from the Winter Ranger course. I graduated from West Point in 76, but I went through, obviously, armored training and then went to the Winter Ranger course. I reached my first unit of where I served in March of 1977. Now, our Army, even at that point, was in very bad shape. And I would argue that by 1975, we had really bottomed out. The Vietnam War destroyed the United States Army. It wasn't just NVA and the Viet Cong. Many of the policies that we had in place, the way the generals operated and managed the force, destroyed the United States Army. It then took from, I would argue, from 1975 to 1985 to rebuild the old army. We didn't really build a fundamentally new army. We just took the old World War II structure, improved upon it, put new equipment in it. We did change some training policies and personnel policies. But what I'm trying to say is the Europeans cannot expect to have a real ground force of any real capability, properly organized, trained on a strategic level for 10 years. So the notion that some agreement could involve that force would be meaningful in any way, shape, or form is absurd. In the meantime, the force that he described would be sitting across from a Russian force that is very well trained, battle hardened, now very, very well led, I would argue, and has great technology at its disposal and knows how to fight. The whole thing is ludicrous nonsense. So you got to go back to something like the Austrian State Treaty. And that needs to be the model. And that involved no U.S., European, NATO forces under any circumstances inside Austria. You'll remember when we flew back from Saudi Arabia in 1991, we actually had to fly around Austria because the Austrians were neutral. They wouldn't allow us just flying troops back from the Middle East to enter their airspace. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about a truly neutral state. That's what the Russians want, with limitations on what they can do. And as has been pointed out repeatedly by everyone from Ambassador Friedman to Professor Mearsheimer and a whole host of others, neutrality was the best thing that ever happened to Austria. They now have a higher standard of living than the Germans do, and that was never true in the past.
And look, the part that's just, it's still stunning to me to see. I know you won't be surprised by what follows here, but it does go to show that this is Lord Ricketts, who is a former national security advisor for the United Kingdom, was going on talking about the difficulties that people are talking about here, that what Sean Bell had mentioned and some of these others. But he says not to worry, because as it turns out, Russia's already lost.
If you look at the big picture, they've really lost badly already, because one of the things they did not want was more NATO closer to Russia. Well, they've got Finland and Sweden in NATO now. They would never have joined if it hadn't been for the war. And they've also got new determination by the Europeans to up their spending on defense, to take on more responsibility and to stand with Ukraine. So I think in the big picture, Russia has in an important sense already lost. And Ukraine is now going to be a pro-Western democratic country, for the long term. A
pro-democratic Western country.
You mean one of the biggest organized crime states in the world, heavily engaged in drug trafficking, child trafficking, and every other horrible form of criminality, is now going to be this liberal democratic paradise. I thought it was nice that he was sporting his Ukrainian pin on his lapel. So obviously this is a very objective thinker and analyst. Listen, the whole British ruling class is infected with self-delusion. The whole, you're talking about a country right now that is nearing open rebellion against its government because the government is dedicated to the destruction of its own people. And he's a part of that. I think the truth is as follows. He's obviously completely delusional and he's wrong. Russia hasn't lost a damn thing. Russia is in better shape now than it's ever been. And Russia obviously is interested in peace, as any sane person, any sane state anywhere in the world would be interested in peace, and is looking for partners in peace. But the partners are reluctant to leave this thing called NATO and strike out on their own, with the exception, obviously, of Prime Minister Orban and I would argue Fico in Slovakia. They're at the vanguard, though, of a very large mob that is beginning to form. NATO is finished. I've said this 1,000 times. It's a terminal patient. In other words, you walk in the room and here's the terminal patient. He's hooked up to all the machinery. He can't speak, move, or do much. And people like Ricketts want to give the patient a haircut and a shave. The truth is, the various others in the room are going to pull the plug on this patient. It's going to go away. NATO doesn't serve the purpose for which it was founded. And it has been wandering in the wilderness looking for a reason to exist ever since the fall of the Soviet Union. They picked the wrong reason to exist, which was war on the Soviet Union. But they're globalists. They need this enemy picture. They need the lie. They need the narrative that's utterly and completely false and fictitious. They need it because if it's given up and people realize, gosh, we've lost badly. NATO has been a total failure. They've thrown everything they have but the kitchen sink at the Russians, and they've been crushed. And we've killed millions of people or destroyed this country of Ukraine. It may never recover to its former position or strength ever. And all of this for what? To supposedly harm, hurt, destroy Russia. It's a huge failure. If Starmer is compelled to admit that, if Macron is compelled to admit it, if Merz is compelled to admit it, they're finished immediately, within minutes. I think they're all going to go away shortly anyhow. But nevertheless, that would be the downfall of the entire globalist project, of which Project Ukraine is a big part. Remember, these are all the same people that invited millions of people from North Africa, the Middle East, and elsewhere to come into the various European states. And it's created chaos and havoc because the people that live in these countries have said, wait a minute, we can't afford them. We don't want them. Why are they here? What's wrong with being German, French, English, Welsh, Scottish, Irish? Everybody's beginning to ask these questions. The Italians have had it, but nobody's been willing to stand up and say, okay, I will take all the abuse for being everything that you say that I am, bigot, racist, all this crap. I don't care anymore. I love my country. I'm going to defend it to the bitter end. And the war that we need to win is not in Eastern Ukraine. It's inside our own countries. That's the issue. That's coming. Today, Nigel Farage is holding some sort of or may have already held it, a public meeting where he was going to display some strategy, which I think is marvelous, on how he's going to deport large numbers of people from England. That's what we need. I mean, you had several thousand Austrian, I don't know how many, tens of thousands, don't know how big it was. They demonstrated in Vienna recently, and they all chanted, no importing, time for deporting. And they want to deport as many of these non-Europeans as they've got in their country. The point is this, there's always a certain number of people from outside any society that can be admitted to the society who are different from the society in small numbers. And that the society can cope with that. What the society doesn't cope well with is a massive invasion of millions. We're not coping well with it. They're not coping well with it. It has to stop, and it has to be reversed. And that's where we're headed. We're all headed there. I just wish we had a real strategy. I cheer when I see President Trump say Washington is a disgrace. Of course it is. I've seen it deteriorate for decades. I was always embarrassed with my European colleagues in NATO whenever I'd come back for conferences in Washington and they came with me. And you see what you had on the streets of Washington, and the criminality was out of control, and it was badly run, badly organized. Dulles Airport was a disaster. He wants to change that. I'm 100% for it. But of course, you and I know that's the tip of the iceberg. We have at least 10 or 12 major cities, over 1 million, that are in terrible condition. And what do you get from the critics? Oh, it's wonderful. It's gotten so much better. Oh, we should be celebrating the presence of tens of thousands of human beings strung out on drugs, living on the streets. That's a great thing. Yeah, what's wrong with that? This all has to stop. Same problems in France and Italy and Germany. And this is common to all of us. It will be reversed. It's going to be difficult. It's going to be ugly. And the whole globalist project is going to collapse. Ukraine is going to go away as a problem because we can't solve it. And I think President Trump knows we cannot solve it. This is a matter for decision by the Russians. Always has been, for a very simple reason. Who was willing to fight? The Russians. Were we willing to fight? No. Were any of the European states willing to go in there and fight, with the possible exception of the Poles, who sent thousands of Poles into that Ukrainian army to fight, and at least 2,000 or 3,000 came back dead. The Poles had said, whoops, we made a mistake. That was a dumb idea. So I don't see anybody going over there anymore, period. I think the whole idea of guarantees is something that needs to go back to the Austrian state treaty. What was guaranteed at that point? There were no forces involved. We and our European allies simply said, yes, we will abide by the provisions in this treaty. We will not try to introduce weapons or equipment or people or anything else into Austria. Austria will govern itself. And we accept the fact that the Russians are going to monitor this for some 20, 25 years to ensure that all the provisions that they have outlined have actually been accepted and implemented. And it worked. There's nothing wrong with that. That's what needs to happen in Ukraine. But if you say we're going to do that, then you're admitting the whole thing is a lie. The entire project from the beginning has been a lie.
And it's interesting you use that phrase. Russians are willing to fight, and clearly we are not. I often think it's comic when you hear so many of this coalition of the willing, and they want these security guarantees as a deterrent to Russia, when we have proven for 3.5 years nobody in Europe is going to fight with their troops. Now, why in the world would they do it later? It defies logic. But the Russians, on the other hand, were very clear on this. And earlier on one of my shows today, we actually had the deputy UN ambassador for Russia, Dmitry Polyansky, on. And I asked him, I said, back in, I think it was May, your boss, Nevensia, the UN ambassador from Russia, said on the UNSC floor that Russia would either accomplish its objectives for the special military operation in negotiations or on the battlefield. And I asked him this morning, has any of that changed?
From the outset, not only my boss, but President Putin, Minister Lavrov, were saying that we are ready to continue our fight if the other side is not listening to what we are saying, and if the other side prefers to see the solution on the battlefield. This is not the scenario that we prefer, but we are ready for this scenario, and nothing has changed in this regard.
And so there you have it there. So the question is this just Russia putting on a good face, or do you think they actually mean what they say?
Well, I think Ambassador Polyansky is correct, and I don't think there's any question about their readiness to do what they need to do to secure their country, and that involves doing exactly what Ambassador Polyansky said. We, on the other hand, and we need to keep this in mind, we are now suddenly presenting Maduro in Venezuela as another potential Saddam Hussein who needs to be removed. We see how well that regime change worked in Iraq. The people of Iraq want us out of the country, and Iraq is now closely aligned with Iran, the very state we said we didn't want to have any say in what happened in Iraq. We did everything we could to put them into power in Iraq. So I think now we're dealing with something similar in Venezuela. I hope we don't think in terms of direct intervention, because if we do, we'll ultimately regret it. On the other hand, I fully support the notion that the drug trafficking and criminality that emanates from Venezuela and moves north via sea and up through Central America and over the Mexican border, all of that needs to be dealt with very substantially, but I would not go down there to fix it because our track record of fixing those kinds of things is not good. But I see a lot of evidence that we're building up for something like that. At the same time, we see a buildup going on right now in the Middle East to prepare Israel for what ostensibly appears to be Israel's resumption of war with Iran. And of course, we've been involved in Azerbaijan and Armenia, and we had a nice, beautiful reality TV program showing Azeris, Aliyev, and Pashinyan, the leader of Armenia, sit together and supposedly sign some great peace accord. That all seems to be falling apart pretty rapidly, and the various mafias that had kept Aliyev in power are now really toying with his removal because they've been utterly annihilated inside Russia, and their hopes and dreams for expanding their control and influence and money are evaporating. And the Armenians that normally sell all of their fruit to the Russians have been halted at the Russian border and can't export anything. So I think we're losing, frankly. And a lot of that, of course, is Israel inspired. Most of it is, although we also want to break up the BRICS, one belt, one road back to China that runs up through Iran and through Azerbaijan and Central Asia. It's not going to work. But we're busy trying to do those things. And then we have this business in Venezuela germinating. And at home, you know, we've gone into Washington, and now the president's talking about going to other cities. Well, that's all fine, well, and good. But again, where's the coherent strategy? Are we just listening to the reality TV show again? Oh, I thought of this last night. This is what we're going to do. And everybody says, oh, that's great. We're going to do this now. There doesn't seem to be any coherence. There aren't any cogent arguments for or against things. Don't see any discussions. And our position overseas has been dramatically weakened. I mean, now President Modi, who, in my judgment, is the leader of one of the most important countries on the planet, India, with what, 1.1 billion or 1.2 billion people, refuses to take phone calls now from President Trump. Won't talk to him. I think that's very unfortunate. But that's a product of the tariff business, which I think has backfired badly for the most part on the United States. So the whole thing is a mess. But the reality TV show continues.